All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? We've talked about obviously a lot of pre 9/11, post 9/11, and just 9/11 cultural moments in our shared collective memory as millennials. But you know what? I've been thinking on this specific thing, right? There's certainly a different way that all types of people have dealt with 9/11. I should say mostly Americans, but unfortunately other people have had to deal with our 9/11 trauma as well, very non-consensually. But it's made me think there's maybe a spectrum of ways people have dealt with 9/11. Obviously some people have the more jingoistic side. Some people have had the more please don't murder me because of your jingoism side. But I think there might be a more literal spectrum that people have dealt with when it comes to their 9/11 trauma.
Some of us are sad, some of us like it.
Exactly. And speaking of maybe literal ways on the spectrum that people have dealt with 9/11, I think this week we should review the Adam Sandler classic, Reign Over Me. But before we get into our review this week, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational Moment of the Week!
Pew, 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 pew.
Woo! Yeah! All right. And Cringe Generational Moment of the Week. So I made reference to 9/11 and the spectrum of ways people have dealt with the trauma. And in this particular movie, it's a very specific kind of spectrum, but we will certainly get into it in the synopsis here. But
the spectrum is haunting Europe, as they say.
Exactly. But I wanted to cover this week on our Cringe Generational Moment a certain way that an individual dealt with their 9/11 trauma. And that is by just lying about their 9/11 trauma. Just lying about it. No 9/11 trauma whatsoever. So our cringe generational person and moment of this week is Alicia, otherwise known as Tanya Head. Now, Brian, are you familiar with Tanya/Alicia Head?
I am. I remember this in the news cycle. Not super like in detail, but I remember Tanya. I can change her.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Speaking of a changed woman here, so to the audience at home who don't know who Tanya Head is, so Tanya Head is a Spanish businesswoman who claimed to be a survivor of the 9/11 attacks under the name of Tanya Head. She joined the World Trade Center Survivors Network support group, later becoming its president. Her name was regularly mentioned in media reports of the attacks. In 2007, it was revealed that Head's story was a complete hoax. She was not in New York City, but in reality, she was in Barcelona.
Also, think about the number of people in this community, a relatively small community, but a non-zero number of people. She was regularly mentioned in reports, and it's like, why?
And not only that, but she became the leader of the support group on top of it. This was a big support group of 9/11 survivors.
Well, if you've ever seen an interview with her, she was oozing with charisma, which I'm sure was a factor.
Oh, most definitely.
Charismatic and hot. She got that real Wisconsin mommy energy.
Oh, dude, I will tell you, there's some Jamaican or Nigerian dudes that would run to the ends of the earth for her. I'll just say that.
Well, I mean, for a variety of reasons, but her lying about 9/11 is a plus for me, I'll say. No, this is such a weird, there's a type of person who just needs to insert themselves in trauma. And you see it a lot on a smaller scale, like online, you see it a lot. People lying about experiencing some sort of awful conundrum or some violent act. But this is probably the greatest public tragedy in all of American history, right? And this woman has inserted herself and tried to make herself as central a figure to that day as she possibly could.
Yeah.
And people just let her.
Oh, man. Post 9/11 was a fucking weird time. Just straight, as somebody who was, a child. So, how I dealt with my 9/11 trauma was, I remember I was in school and the teacher was like, hey, the Twin Towers were hit. And I was like, okay. And then just didn't think about it because I was 8 years old. So I didn't really deal with 9/11 trauma the same way that maybe people 10 years old, 15 years older than me dealt with it. So for me, a lot of this is just I'm sure it was horrifying to watch on TV, but do we still have to have trauma about this 25 fucking years later? As somebody from Wisconsin, do we still need to have trauma about this?
I guess what's interesting is, my formative 9/11 memory is, of course, being called in to watch it happen with the rest of my school, my very small school in Mountain, Wisconsin. But then what I remember right about that day is during like recess, all the kids are talking about what happened. And the kids don't know. Nobody knew at that time what happened, but especially a bunch of elementary school students in Mountain, Wisconsin. And we're all saying, oh, I bet it was the Japanese. The Japanese are going to go to war with us because they're mad about World War II, was the prominent opinion in my elementary school. And I went home as a small child, all riled up and ready to go to war for revenge. That's what all the kids were saying. And that's probably what a lot of teachers by the end of the day were saying, right? And my mom was kind of like, that's not really, I don't know if that's, really what, you want to be saying. We don't really know what happened yet. We don't know kind of what's going to happen. And so because I was a little kid, I then the next day said to all my classmates, maybe we shouldn't go to, and then I got bullied for it.
Yeah, same. Later, same. Not quite about 9/11, but just the general shenanigans that the U.S. got involved with after
Bush era, yeah. Being teased for not liking George Bush as an elementary school kid, which sounds so stupid to say. Like, why did any of us care?
Well, do you remember, there was that documentary, Jesus Camp, and there's a scene in the movie where they, like, make the children hug a cutout of George W. Bush. Like, that's how weird post 9/11 shit was. Like, people really don't understand how fucking nuts that time was. It was like a fever dream.
It's hard to imagine for like Zoomers to like put into words how collectively the whole country just overnight went insane for a few years. And I think that kind of ties into our subject and how kind of she got away with this, because everyone was so emotional about 9/11 in both sincere and deserved ways, but also in kind of like overwrought ways, that the idea of someone lying about this, right, I think for a lot of people seemed untoward. Like they almost couldn't wrap their heads around it. So of course all these new, like, I say of course kind of sarcastically, but of course all of these reporters and things go, oh, of course this lady's telling the truth. Why would you lie about this?
Well, speaking of lies, I want to get into some of her claims because they're hilarious. So, Head claimed to have been inside the World South Tower when United Airlines Flight 175 hit, crawling through smoke and flames on the 78th floor and sustaining severe burns to her arm. If true, this would have made her one of only 19 people at or above the point of impact to have survived. And looking at her, it's like, no, she couldn't have moved fast enough. Like, I know we made the joke earlier.
Yeah, you hate to say it.
This woman is American size. She's from Spain, but she's very American size. There's no motherfucking way she could have ran fast enough to survive this. I'm sorry.
Yeah, not being an asshole. This lady was not crawling through plumes of smoke with her heart still going and that incredible heat. That just wasn't happening.
This was not a D1 athlete, okay? This was, Brian, you made the joke, this is a Wisconsin-sized woman, and she is a Wisconsin-sized woman. And then, on top of it, Head claimed that her fiance Dave was killed in the North Tower, though in later tellings of the story, she said that Dave was actually her husband. So she's already crossing stories here.
What was the response when that first started to happen, do you think? Did people just kind of let it go?
They were like, well, she was planning on marrying him, so maybe she's the husband in her mind or something. You know what I mean?
People were too uncomfortable to point out the incongruity.
Oh my God, this is even better. She also claimed that a dying man passed his wedding ring to her so it could be returned to his widow. It had been rescued by Wells Crowther, whose heroic acts on that day were widely reported in the media. This is insane that anybody believes this.
I mean, we needed a hero. We needed people to believe in.
They say that a hero can save.
The song was about her. So, like, did she ever follow up on what happened with that wedding ring? Did she ever claim to get it back to the person it belonged to? Did she keep it?
Not in the wiki article I'm finding here, but I'm going to assume that it's like, oh, well, they went to a different college in Connecticut. You wouldn't know who she is. Oh, God. And then Head regularly recounted her claims to, I want to think it's like Head from Korn, but I don't think it's that Head. That'd be hilarious. Yeah. Like, it's like, oh, you're Tanya Head,
he claimed that he
right?
was one of the survivors of
and
9/11.
He's like tweaked out on meth or whatever. He's like, yeah, I'm that Head for sure.
Oh, that would be so awesome.
Recounted her claims to Ground Zero tour groups in vivid detail, saying, quote, I was there at the towers. I'm a survivor. I'm going to tell you about that, unquote. She was featured in retrospective 9/11 articles as a representative of the 20,000 surviving victims who escaped the damaged building. Richard Zimbler, her successor as president of the WTC Survivors Network, said, quote, there was no reason to doubt her story. She looked the part. No, she did not. She had a badly injured arm that appeared to have burn scars, and her story was very realistic. I highly doubt she had third-degree burn scars in her fucking arm.
I mean,
no
like,
way.
There's no way. That's my thought too. Like, I mean, I'm not a fucking expert in pretty much anything, but this story doesn't sound realistic. It sounds like bullshit, just on
Okay,
its face.
I'm literally looking. I found a picture of her arms, and maybe it could have been a burn, but not third. It does not look anything like fucking Freddy Krueger, which is what that would look like. I'm sorry,
Right.
that's nonsense. Anybody who bought that, it's like they just didn't want to question it. Like
But
straight
also,
up.
what does she look the part? Like, did they just mean that she had sustained injuries? Like,
I guess, but like you could sustain injuries from a burn from getting cooking oil on your arm.
right.
It did
Yeah,
like
yeah.
insane. Like just
I-
absolutely insane.
This was just people were so uncomfortable post 9/11 that everyone collectively felt like they would feel so awful if they accused her of lying and it turned out it was true that they just decided to let it float.
Yeah, God. And then eventually in 2007, the New York Times sought to verify key details of Head's story as part of an anniversary piece. Head claimed a degree from Harvard University and a graduate business degree from Stanford, but those institutions had no record of her. She claimed she had been working at Merrill Lynch in the South Tower, but Merrill Lynch had no record of her employment, nor did Merrill Lynch have offices in the World Trade Center at the times of the attack.
Awesome. Awesome.
Head backed out of 3 scheduled interviews and later refused to speak to reporters at all. The Times then contacted other members of the Survivors Network and raised questions about the veracity of Head's story. By the week of September 27, 2007, the network voted to remove her as president and as director of the group. Among other questionable elements of Head's story was her engagement to a man named Big Dave, who had perished in the opposite tower. The man's family claimed to have never heard of Tanya Head. So she literally referenced a real person. It's like,
Wow. I respect
brazen.
that she found a guy named Big Dave. Because if you look at this lady and then you hear, oh, she loved a guy named Big Dave, you think, oh, yeah, she would date someone named Big Dave.
Yeah. The Barcelona newspaper La Vanguardia ultimately revealed that Head had been in class in a university in Barcelona during the 9/11 attacks, where she had told her classmates that her scarred arm was a result of an automobile accident or alternatively a horse riding accident many years earlier. So yeah, once again, not a burn. I mean, automobile, possibly a burn, but like
It could
horse
be.
riding accident? Like, come on.
Yeah, no.
So
It's
yeah,
so awesome to make
eventually
these
her
huge
eventually
lies
her
and not
claims
even
were
think about it.
yeah, exactly right. So yeah, eventually her claims were debunked, of course. She got fired from her job in Spain, where she actually lived. And then eventually an article came out that was maybe a hoax, but who knows, where it claimed that she committed suicide, but that never happened either.
Not even a U.S. citizen.
Absolutely hilarious. But that leads, I think, perfectly into the review of this movie, because this movie is just another element of like just the nadir of Bush's approval rating, the very, very tail end of like the worst years of post 9/11 hysteria. And this movie, I think, is a lot less perniciously evil than Tanya Head, but I think there's some pernicious elements to this movie. I'm gonna be honest with you here. This movie is not like reprehensibly evil or anything, but there's very clearly elements in here that like would not age very well. Have not aged very well, I should clarify.
Right off the bat, in the post 9/11 aspect, and as you said, Taylor, we allude to 9/11 and the years right after it because we are aging millennials. This movie only could have come out in this period. And the funny thing about it is that at this time, the early to mid 2000s, really the very end of the mid 2000s, the only way on a large scale to talk about 9/11 was to be so maudlin and so self-serious about it and so dramatic so that everyone had to take it seriously. You had to really performatively be like, we are taking 9/11 seriously as a discussion. And the thing is that in doing that, years later, you look at this and you go, this is kind of crass. It's a little unnecessary.
Yeah, it is. And like, oh, never mind. Let's get into the details. I do have a point about that. So once again, this is Reign Over Me. It came out in 2007. And the title of this movie is inspired by the Who song Love Reign Over Me from the Who's 1973 album Quadrophenia. And I listened to the song actually before. I mean, it's in the movie, of course, but I listened to the song in its entirety. And of course, I mean, it's a fucking Who song. It's great. I mean, seriously.
Yeah, it's a beautiful song. You could argue that I won't get too into it. You could argue it's the Who's masterpiece. It's a song that, if for like rock and roll nerds, is a pretty weighty song. And so naming your movie after it's a statement in itself, I would say.
No, absolutely, for sure. And then this movie is rated R. It was directed by Mike Binder, and it was written by him as well. It was produced by Jack Bender and Michael Rotenberg. And Mike Bender, of course, the director and writer, is a director, writer, producer, and actor. He's been involved in such films as Coupe de Ville, Indian Summer, which Indian Summer is a quasi-autobiographical movie about him growing up at Camp Tamakawa or something like that, or Tomqua, which was the childhood summer camp of Sam Raimi, and Mike Binder and Sam Raimi were like childhood friends, which I think is fucking cool, obviously, and Ted Raimi's also in this movie, so I mean, there's that fucking...
I was so happy to see him.
Maybe we should review Indian Summer at one point, because it'd be interesting to watch a movie that's partially about Sam Raimi and his friend's childhood. That'd be really interesting.
It would be fun to look at a different generation's reflection on their own youth as people that didn't belong to that era, you know?
Exactly. And as somebody who is, I mean, I would say Sam Raimi is an auteur. Would you agree with that, Brian?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I think we have mentioned a handful of times, I think, the high regard we hold the Raimis in. And I think good subjects for the podcast, because there's never going to be another filmmaker like Sam Raimi. There truly won't.
No, absolutely. And he was also involved in such movies as Blank Man, The Contender, Minority Report. I know we always mention the Minority Report because it seems like everybody and everything we've ever reviewed goes back to the Minority Report. It's like the 6 degrees of separation.
It's very Kevin Bacon, yeah.
The Upside of Anger, this film, of course. The movie One Day, the Bill Burr comedy special Paper Tiger, and a bunch of other projects that he was minorly involved in, but I didn't include them on here. And Jack Bender, as I mentioned earlier, is Mike's younger brother and has primarily worked with his brother. And he's only, I think, ever been involved in 2 movies that were not related to his brother. And those 2 were being a producer on First Reformed and the documentary Eating Our Way to Extinction, which I think is very interesting as well. That is a documentary that I'm 100% sure that vegan straight edge guys have probably watched. I'm just going to be honest with you. Although I have no idea on that, but I'm assuming that.
It sounds like the title of like a Vegan Reich album.
Yeah, right. It might be. It might legitimately be.
You may as well be, dude.
And then I mentioned Michael Rotenberg earlier, and he's mostly a TV show individual. He also worked as a producer on such films as Beverly Hills Ninja, Office Space, and Biodome. So classic 90s comedies. So I got to respect Michael Rotenberg there. And this movie's 124 minutes long. It had a budget of $20 million and it grossed $22.2 million. And on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 64% critic score and an 81% audience score. Now, I want to highlight the budget real quick. So we're just going to get into it right now. This is a Happy Madison subsidiary movie. This is a sappy 9/11 drama film that is a Happy Madison drama film. I want that to be very clear. That is what this movie is.
It is fundamentally a Happy Madison movie. The discourse you would hear from people you went to school with, if you're my age, when this came out. And I want to be clear. I've said before on the pod, I'm a big Adam Sandler fan. I legitimately am. And I don't hate this movie. But the thing that you heard when this came out was, oh, this is like a whole new type of movie for Adam Sandler. And it's really not.
It's really not.
Very deeply a Happy Madison film. Even his performance is very comfortable for him. And I don't mean that it's a bad thing, but you'll watch this and you're like, fuck, this is just a slightly less goofy Adam Sandler movie.
It's goofy in different ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is a Happy Madison movie, and I think we've talked about it before, either off mic or on mic, but Happy Madison movies, Adam Sandler, he doesn't give a fuck about box office. So, like, the fact that he's just able to make this movie at all and, like, hang out with his friends Don Cheadle and Mike Binder, he's more than happy. He was fine to take a bit of a haircut. He's totally fine with that.
The other thing about that, and one of the things I always say about Adam Sandler is people always criticize him for making this lowest common denominator shit, which he does. But there's no denying he wants to make that. Every movie he makes is the movie I think that Adam Sandler wants to make. And that includes his weird 9/11 autism drama. He did not need to make this.
Yes, and we want to be very clear here. We're not being glib or offensive. He is literally made autistic because of 9/11. This is not a joke. This is what happens in the motherfucking movie.
If you have not seen the movie, I don't know how much more clearly I can say it. He gets overstimulated and he has to wear headphones and he rocks back and forth.
He has extreme hyperfixations. He always talks about trivia that nobody cares about.
Can you name all of the Great Lakes or something? Yeah. If you have not seen this movie, you know 9/11 makes him autistic.
Oh, God. But
and in a sense, it made much of the country autistic.
It actually did. Oh, man. But yeah, so let's get into the synopsis here. So after the Twin Towers collapsed in 2001, Charlie Feynman, played by Adam Sandler, and the next trivia fact I had here, and this was so fucking funny, but the 2 lead roles were originally supposed to be portrayed, or I don't think they were supposed to be. I think Mike Binder had these in mind because there's no way he could have gotten at least one of them. But he wanted Charlie Feynman to be played by Tom Cruise and Alan to be played by Javier Bardem. That is nuts.
That's such a different movie already. And you're going to say, no, it wouldn't be. But that absolutely... You take Don Cheadle and Adam Sandler out of this movie, it's a different movie. No one else is going to make the choices Sandler would made in this performance. No one else.
Do you think Javier Bardem would have got on set and he's like, Charlie, how much of your family have you lost in a coin toss? Yeah, so
God bless. Tom Cruise might have done this movie. He's such a fucking wacko and such a goofball. He loves doing weird, earnest shit.
You know, honestly, like he could have been interesting in this.
Oh, I don't mean that he'd be good in it. I just mean I could see him wanting to do this movie.
No, I genuinely do, because a lot of people I think have kind of, and I don't know if people do this now, but people certainly did that back then. We're like, oh, Tom Cruise is a pretty boy who does these like big budget whatever, but like
he's good.
But no, he's like a legitimately good actor, and he's been involved in a lot of weird fucking projects. I mean, he was in, fucking Stanley Kubrick's last movie about fucking Epstein, proto Epstein.
Yeah, he's in Eyes Wide Shut. It's a fucking great performance. I mean, he does, popcorn movies, but he's very good at them. But I would not have this movie any other way, though. You take Sandler and Cheadle out of this, it's not the same movie, for better or worse.
Absolutely motherfucking not. But yeah, so he lost everything important in his life. It has been 5 years since Charlie's wife and daughters died, and now the once successful and sociable man has become a withdrawn shadow of his former self. He does not discuss his loss, causing his in-laws to worry for his sanity, believing that he struck the tragedy from his mind. And it's like, well, that's one way you can interpret it, but also, he really loves trains and video games now, so he's gained something.
And I'm going to say, Taylor, and I think you agree, as flawed as this movie is, I do enjoy it. This is like a popcorn movie for me. This is, for me, just to be clear before I get into my critiques, this is like my equivalent of a Hallmark movie for a housewife. It's stupid and it doesn't really make sense. And I watch it and I think, oh, that's nice. This is me being genuine and vulnerable here and honest. I think this is a nice movie, but it's fucking dumb and weird.
It is dumb and weird, but I totally agree. Yeah, this is the Adam Sandler hot couch guy and man-child version of a fucking Hallmark movie. And I'm not even saying that in like a dick way. Like, that's just legitimately...
the Hallmark movie for the hot couch guy.
Yeah.
That is this movie. One of the, we're going to have to keep going back to how Adam Sandler's character is literally made autistic by the death of his family. They could have toned that down and maybe it would have worked and been a little, because there's ways people respond to trauma that are weird. There are ways that people that grieve that are weird and off-putting. Why is he autistic?
It's baffling because, it's one of those things where, it's one of those, obviously you can portray somebody who's autistic in a movie and have them deal with trauma and stress and everything. I mean, fucking Rain Man's an example of that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's ways you could do that in a movie that is at least somewhat realistic and not nonsense. But this is nonsense. I'm sorry. And some people are like, well, and I think you mentioned it too, and I think we were trying to figure it out. Maybe he was maybe on the high functioning part of the spectrum, because they describe some things that because Alan and Charlie were college roommates and stuff like that, right? And maybe there's some truth to that, but the truth is that he goes from a guy with a functioning dental practice. He's got a family and kids that he's raising. He's got in-laws that he's cool with. He's somebody who is socially and financially and, job-wise successful, to being to the level of a mumbling, stimming, autistic person. And I'm sorry, It does not go from that to that, no matter how much trauma. That does not happen.
And what you and I, I was watching this last night, Taylor, the conversation we were having is, the only way that this could make sense is, like you said, if he was high functioning, but always already on the spectrum, of course, because that's the fucking way that it works, right? It's the way that you are. But that is not how the movie presents it. We are, as the audience, supposed to believe that Charlie was not just functioning, but was very charismatic and was cool, and that Don Cheadle kind of looked up to him, right? That's kind of the way that we're led to view him before his family's death, as an aspirational figure.
Exactly, in a very similar way to another movie we reviewed, Pig, the Nicolas Cage movie we reviewed a couple months back. But in that movie, though, the difference is that even though obviously the way that Nick Cage's character deals with his trauma is obviously very extreme, but he's still the same person as before. He's still
the same person.
He's just dealing with trauma, and he's not really obviously came to terms with it. He's withdrawn, but he's still the same person.
Imagine though, Adam Sandler as this character in Pig. I need my pig.
Yeah.
Where's my pig?
Who sent you?
Who sent you to take my pig?
Yeah. Don't lie to me. Yeah.
But that's the other thing. I like Adam Sandler a lot. I'm a big fan. I think he's one of the funniest people alive. I find him very likable. This performance is so comfortable for Sandler.
It is.
I'm a raging man child.
I'm a raging man
child with
a lisp.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone was going, this is so groundbreaking for him. He's really showing his range. And like, it's fine. It's a good performance for what it is. But no, this is just an Adam Sandler performance.
No, absolutely. We mentioned it. So anyways, when Charlie suddenly runs into his former college roommate, Alan Johnson, played by Don Cheadle, together once again on a Manhattan street corner, Alan is shocked to see just how far his old friend has fallen. He's now literally always focused on Among Us and furries. No, I'm going to stop the fucking autism references, I promise. Charlie's hair is long and he wears a headset that he can let the music drown out any mentions of his wife and child. Nah, I think it's to stop the overstimulation. Never mind. That's the last autism reference. I promise.
How often are people bringing up his wife and child that he just needs to constantly have headphones?
Yeah. Oh, God. I'm surprised this was not part of the synopsis I found, but I wanted to include this on here. There's also a subplot where a woman, played by Saffron Burrows, sexually propositions Alan. He refuses her advancements, and she writes a letter saying that he sexually harassed her to try to get her way. She eventually drops a potential lawsuit saying she wasn't in the right headspace. So, like, I went over a lot of plot here. So basically this woman's like, hey, I'm here for a dental procedure. And he's like, oh, yeah, what you looking for? And he's like, I don't know, you take a look. And she opens up her mouth nice and wide.
And she's like, I want to suck your big Don Cheadle penis in my face.
And then he's just like, no, you gotta leave. And then eventually she writes a letter, and then I don't know if like lead dentist or like another practicing dentist, who's played by Mike from Breaking Bad, which is hilarious. And he's just like, Alan, we gotta figure this out, man. Just talk to her. And then like, yeah, eventually gets her back, and it's like, yeah, so I wasn't in the right headspace. I don't want to suck you off anymore, and I'm not going to sue you. And it's like, why was this even a plot point in this fucking movie?
So there are a couple of very unnecessary and weird choices in this movie. Number one is this, because so the theme of the movie, right, is that Don Cheadle's character is kind of stuck in a rut in his middle age, right? So he's kind of dealing with all this sense of malaise and kind of being stuck. And you would think at the beginning of this subplot, well, maybe he's going to be tempted to cheat on his wife. That'll be the conflict. That would still be pretty dumb, but it would make sense. It would add something to the overall theme of the movie, right? And of middle age and all that. Instead, it's just a movie about a false rape accusation or a sexual assault accusation that really doesn't go anywhere, doesn't have any real payoff. It's just sort of there in the background. And also, just as you said, his board of directors, the board at this dental practice, would never say that. They would never say, look, this woman is accusing you of sexual assault. I think the thing we got to do is you got to get in with her. You got to have a one-on-one conversation with her alone, and you got to discuss it with her openly with no lawyers there.
Yeah, I did not think about that, but you're totally fucking right. That would be a 1,000,000% liability. That is...
Yeah, they would never do that.
The fact it turned out this way in the movie is obviously stupid, along with every other part of the subplot. But then on top of it, would take a fucking miracle for that to happen, like just straight up.
Well, it would just be a bad call. I can't shake the feeling, and I'm not saying this is an evil movie, that it's sinister or anything. Because this subplot doesn't go anywhere, it feels kind of like they're just saying, sometimes false accusations happen.
Which is so sinister considering what just came out 10 years after this movie came out with fucking Weinstein and Bill Cosby and everything.
Right.
This seems really fucking sinister in hindsight, I'm going to be honest with you.
I don't know that it was. I'm not saying, by the way, that you can't write a story that involves some sort of false accusation. That's a story. And that is a thing that happened, whatever. My issue with this is it serves no purpose to the story. It's kind of just there. It's just worked, and it's like, hey, it's as if Binder was just like, hey, I'd really like to work in a false rape accusation into this movie, just to put the idea in people's heads. That's how it feels. And I'm not accusing Binder of anything. It's just a bad call.
And Don Cheadle was reading this as like, okay, but just why? And he's like, Mike Binder's like, don't ask any questions. Don't ask any questions. Gonna be in the fucking movie. And it's like, Don Cheadle's like, oh, shit, all right.
No, all he had to go is, Don, this is a 9/11 movie. People are gonna love it. They're gonna praise you. And that's one of the main issues. This movie there are choices that didn't need to be made that add nothing to the themes. And I have an even more contentious one. Another thing that they didn't need to do. Didn't need to have 9/11 in this movie.
No, they didn't.
Movie could have been a car accident. Could have been anything, and the movie would have been equally effective. The emotional arc would have been the same.
It's one of those things where I think this movie, even though I do enjoy this movie, like I enjoyed both my watchings of this movie this week.
Yeah.
But like there's a movie that I think has something great underneath the surface and it's always trying to scratch the surface and just never gets there. Like I'm serious. Every single element of this movie has elements to where this could be an incredible like drama, and it just never gets past that fucking giant barrier that the movie puts there in front of it. It's crazy.
You need to get rid of all this gimmicky kind of emotionally manipulative stuff, like this false rape accusation subplot, the 9/11 stuff, which I think is fighting for unearned sentiment. Instead of actually getting the emotional response from the audience and saying, "Do you remember 9/11?" to get it. But this is a hot couch guy like Hallmark movie. That's what I enjoyed about it when I enjoyed things about it. So I like movies about male friendships. I don't really think that it's not a story that you see in like Hollywood productions very often. It's nice to see. I think there's something to be said about friends reuniting, and one of them has gone through some trauma and the other is in this kind of like midlife crisis, and they're reconnecting and they're kind of, revisiting their old friendship and discovering new things about themselves and each other. But you add this 9/11 stuff, and first of all, it's pretty crass. Like, it's pretty manipulative. It's also just a huge albatross around the simple story's neck, right?
No, it is. And, you talked about movies about male friendship too. And like movies with male friendship that includes like actual like emotional vulnerability is even rarer on top of that. And like there's some like legitimately good, like, psychological stuff and, once again, men being open about their emotions and with their friends and their partners and everything. Like there's elements to this that once again are almost approaching greatness, but it just never gets there because you're right about like these fucking thematic albatrosses, like that just weigh it down way too much.
And I feel like, I know that we said earlier that this movie bombed. And I grew up in a pro Adam Sandler household. What I remember hearing from people that saw this movie when it came out was that it was really good. And I don't know if that's just because they were predisposed to liking Adam Sandler, but I feel like for years it would follow me around. Like whenever I'd hear about this movie, people would go, it's pretty good. And I enjoy it, but like, again, nobody watched this movie and thought, why is this about 9/11? Doesn't that feel cynical to anyone?
I mean, to be fair, Brian, and this is true, is that the first major Hollywood production about 9/11 is a Nick Cage movie that features a scene where a bunch of firefighters from Sheboygan go up to New York City and offer NY, fire department officers a bunch of brats. That's a scene that actually happens in that movie. So like the 9/11 furor was weird. Like nobody really knew how to make a 9/11 movie at this point, very clearly.
Because everyone was thinking about 9/11. But nobody also wanted to talk about it the wrong way. And so, like, this movie is almost like, well, we're going to make a movie about America's collective trauma of 9/11, but it's not actually about 9/11. And I don't know, maybe that was supposed to be more tasteful, but to me, it just comes off as like they almost like they shoehorned 9/11 in.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if this was like a script that Adam wrote in like 2000 and was like, I'm going to make a movie of this. And then 9/11 happened. He's like, well, I'm going to wait a few years for this one to matriculate a little bit. Like Mike Bender or whoever. Yeah, Mike Bender, the writer, right. But yeah, I would not be surprised if Mike Bender, wrote this shit in like 2000 and like had it on hand for a while. I was like, oh, we can make this about 9/11.
Well, because you can imagine how you would tweak this movie to not have anything to do with 9/11.
Oh, yeah. As we mentioned, car accident, just some other mass tragedy, maybe a house burning down or something. It could have been anything. Anything. So after that whole discussion, of course, we just had, Alan wants to bring Charlie out of his shell by convincing him to see a therapist. But before we get to that, Charlie wants Alan to come out of his shell by having Alan see his like nu metal band play. Charlie has like a nu metal band where he plays the fucking drums. He also just loves playing Shadow of the Colossus, which, I'm not going to say anything about a small individual destroying giant, maybe tower-like things. I'm not going to say the symbolism of that.
That's an interesting read.
Well, that was actually in the IMDb trivia that was like a purposeful, which is, I don't know about that.
Kind of stupid.
Very dumb.
If that's intentional, that's pretty stupid.
Yeah. They'll see some Mel Brooks movies. And then also, Alan's dad just dies. Like, I just saw a bunch of Mel Brooks movies. It's really fun. This cat's cool. I think does he say, like, this cat is cool, you should see him or something? Or something like, no, this shit was crazy. And it's like, Mel Brooks? Like, I mean, I like Mel Brooks movies, but, like, you're not, like, talking about some deep cut. What the fuck?
Well, it's weird because, like, I love Mel Brooks, of course, but they leave the theater. Couple of things over what you just went through. I have a couple of thoughts to get through. So they leave the theater going, wow. I mean, obviously, Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor were great on their own, but imagine if they'd worked more together. Like the most basic thoughts about a movie. It's just like, who talks about, I don't know. I talk about movies after I see. It's just seeing Mel Brooks is like this life change, John Cheadle, and he's clearly seen these movies before, right? We're supposed to assume, but he's just like, wow, I've never seen Mel Brooks that way before. It really has got me thinking about what I've been missing in life. Like you can watch Mel Brooks while you're married with kids.
Oh, yes, and I did want to mention, too, so his wife is played by Jada Pinkett Smith, which is hilarious, because there's a scene later on where it's like, I wonder if Will Smith talks about this when Jada Pinkett's getting railed by, like, a guy 30 years younger than her or whatever. Like,
yeah, she's being very Jada in this movie. That's another central conflict of this movie that doesn't quite work. So the whole thing of, like, midlife crisis thing, the male friendship thing, all of those things, they do work for me. Don Cheadle's wife let's just not beat around the bush. She's kind of jealous that he's hanging out with Charlie so much. And I guess I don't understand. I know I'm not married. I'm not, I haven't been in a serious relationship like that in a long time. But it's like, well, what's the big deal? If Don Cheadle just says to his wife, hey, I'm kind of depressed lately. I'm kind of in a rut. So seeing my friend, it's good for me and it's good for him because he's got all these problems. And, his wife would be like, oh, well, that's fine. Because Charlie in the film, he doesn't drink. He's not like encouraging Don Cheadle to go after girls.
Well,
he's just a nice troubled. He talks about pussy. Who cares? Like,
no, I was gonna say, like, there is a little bit of that, and then also, okay, so it's one of those things, right, where I think it's because Don Cheadle basically has like the world on his shoulders of his like family life. Like he's taking care of his elderly mother and father. Oh, and then I wanted to mention, so after the Mel Brooks marathon, Jada Pinkett calls like, I've been trying to reach you. Your dad died, and it's like just comes out of nowhere. It actually made me laugh when I heard that. I'm like, no motherfucking way. They just literally dropped like, your dad died while you're watching Mel Brooks movies.
Yeah, that bothered me. The only thing that bothered me about it really is there could have been, and maybe there is, and I missed it. There's no foreshadowing to his dad dying, right?
Well, so from what I remember, I work in geriatrics. I see this stuff all the time. His dad, seemingly to me, is somebody who's going through some probably pretty significant cognitive decline. That's not necessarily obviously related to physical health, or it doesn't have to be. So I don't think that's foreshadowed as anything.
That would have made a big difference for me. The other thing, I guess, I keep harping on how this movie adds dramatic elements to this film that don't really add anything to the narrative. Maybe I'm going to sound like an asshole here. Do you feel like Don Cheadle's dad dying contributes at all to the narrative, to the conflict, or to the emotional center of the movie?
Not at all.
Yeah, me either. Thank you.
It's literally something that happens, and 5 minutes later, it never gets brought up again. And not even 3.5 minutes later, it never gets brought up again. There's there's a funeral scene, and then fucking Charlie's like accountant comes like, hey, stop harassing my client. He's like, I'm not harassing your client. He's like, oh, okay. And then
that's another scene in the movie where it's like there's a conflict that is immediately resolved.
Is this a precursor to Ted Lasso? Like,
it's okay. It's so much better than Ted Lasso, but that is what it reminded me of. This movie would have been so much better if it's, hey, here are two middle-aged friends. They're reacquainting themselves with each other, and they are both troubled in different ways. That's your movie. Instead, it's about his dad dying, and it's about this false sexual assault allegation for some reason. It's about 9/11. They add all of this shit that complicates the movie and is like, I'm going to say, I think it's kind of cheap attempt to drum up more emotion from the audience. And it's not at the benefit of
It is Happy Madison sentimentality.
It is absolutely what they do in the last 15 minutes of every Happy Madison comedy throughout this movie, and it detracts from the actual effective emotional core of this movie. Because guess what? The cringy, weepy stuff about friends hanging out and they bust each other's balls and they listen to Springsteen together. I mean, it's sappy, but that's a nice thing. Like, that's entertaining to watch. And you're like, oh, these guys are kind of getting to know each other again. There's something to be said for that. But all this extra shit that's like, oh, this is very serious. This is very heart-pulling. It takes away from it.
Oh, man. But yeah, so after all of that, because there's a lot of shit that happens in this movie, we just kind of scratched the surface. But eventually, he goes to the therapist, who's played by Liv Tyler. And after every session, it just lasts a few minutes. She's kind of just barely scraping the surface. And basically, she's just like, okay, well, you don't have to tell me, but you have to tell somebody about your family. And eventually he does tell Don Cheadle about like his wife and kids and the dog and the story about how his family died in 9/11, which is legitimately, I would say, easily the best scene in this movie. Adam Sandler is doing a phenomenal monologue here. Like, it's legitimately, if you ignore all the other bullshit this movie has, is genuinely pretty effective. He does a great fucking job in this scene.
Hot take of mine. I think Adam can monologue, not just in this movie, consistently.
He's a fantastic actor.
Yeah, he can really hit an emotional core of a character. And obviously, he doesn't have a ton of range. I'm not trying to say that. But there's a type of character he can really hit to the core of and really make you understand and feel for. Whether it's in this or in Punch Drunk Love, which again are kind of the same kinds of character, which are angry, enraged man-children.
Or Uncut Gems, too, is pretty similar.
Yeah,
there's definitely some similarities there.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, and I also do love this monologue scene because I would have just loved it. There was like Happy Madison comedy angles to it. It was like, you know, after my family died, I just really wish I could have just been like, Al-Qaeda, you want to go back to your home, Al-Qaeda?
You want to go back I want to go back to my home.
You can suck my white ass, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
There is comedy like that. Because look, just for a couple of examples, there's the scene when before they go to see all the Mel Brooks movies, where he keeps calling Don Cheadle the F slur, and Don Cheadle says, "Don't call me that. That's offensive." And Charlie says, "To a gay guy, it's offensive. To you, it's just the thing to say." That is just a quintessential Happy Madison line. When Charlie is meeting with Liv Tyler for his first therapy session, he says to Don Cheadle, "I can't talk to her. She's got nice tits." There are moments where it totally forgets that it's supposed to be a serious Adam Sandler vehicle and just becomes this weird crass comedy for a second. Well, and I like that. I don't care. I'm not offended by it or whatever, but let's call a spade a spade.
Well, speaking of crass comedy, I also would have loved if there was just a cut. I'm sure it's on the Blu-ray or something, where like a very offensively portrayed look Osama Bin Laden is walking down the street. And he's like, "Hey, Charlie, guess what? I eat pieces of shit like your family for breakfast." And he goes like, "You eat pieces of my family shit for
you eat pieces of my family shit for no."
And Osama's like, "No."
No. I mean, that's probably a deleted scene, and you don't mess with the Zohan.
Yeah. So anyways, and also talk about another baffling moment. So later on, following a suicide by cop attempt.
That's so fucked up. That's so fucked up. I can't believe they did that. This movie, and they're trying too hard to make you take the drama seriously.
They are. And also, I love how, the fucking cops beat him up, right? It's so funny. It's so fucking funny. And then they're like, well, we pulled a gun on it. And also, once again, something gets immediately resolved. Ted Raimi shows up. Not actually Ted Raimi, but Ted Raimi's character, of course. And he's just like, hey, they beat him up, but they're not going to press any charges, but they want him to go to, a psychiatric ward for, 3 days. It's like, wow, that was immediately resolved.
Look, these cops, they're not mad at you. They just want to see you get help because they understand that you are in crisis because they're cops.
It's something. And also the trivia fact I had here. So when Charlie's hospitalized, he's wearing a shirt featuring a beaver insignia of Camp Tamaqua. That was the camp that Mike Binder and Sam Raimi went to.
I'm pretty sure that there is a sweater from that camp in the background of the first Evil Dead movie.
I would have to rewatch it, but I think there might be some truth to that.
I think it's the scene when Scotty pulls back the shower curtain, or he opens a closet or something and it's hanging up there. Anyone listening, if you can confirm or deny this for me, I would appreciate it.
Hell yeah. Oh, and then, so eventually after all that, legal proceedings commence and Judge Raines, played by R.I.P., literally he died today, Donald Sutherland. What a fucking coincidence. We're reviewing this on the day that Donald Sutherland died.
Gotta give it up for him.
Based live legend. Absolutely
based live legend. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, one of the great base live films of all time, I would say. Of course, he was the predatory professor in Animal House, who I think is very cool.
He also is a Kurt Vonnegut cosplayer. No, I'm just kidding. He does kind of look like Kurt Vonnegut, though. But he does. He also birthed our favorite neocon, as you mentioned, Kiefer Sutherland.
Yeah. Kiefer Sutherland. Makes you wonder, was Donald that based of a lib as he got older? Because Kiefer Sutherland is a real dumbass, like a true neocon.
Well, I mean, he protested a lot of different wars. I'll just say that. Like,
Yeah.
Donald Sutherland, like, legitimately did get arrested a bunch of times. So I got to respect that. He dated Jane Fonda during her Hanoi Jane phase. I mean, there's some basedness. I mean, seriously.
Not gonna say like I don't give a shit what most celebrities' politics are because they're celebrities and actors and not politicians. But Kiefer Sutherland, very dumb guy. We love to see him, though. I send him my regards. I hope he's doing well.
But yeah, so anyway, so the legal proceedings here are whether to determine to commit Charlie to psychiatric care, which
why do so many Happy Madison films have a climaxes in a courthouse? Like,
well, and this one's got a sicko lib judge in it, like straight up.
It's awesome. It is awesome. That's so great. Not to do when he says, "The more I think about it, this is a family matter. This isn't for the courts to be involved in." What judge?
And not only that, but there are so many outbursts in here that would never happen in regular court. There would have been contempts of court. There would have been jail sentences for how many fucking outbursts were in this courtroom. This is nonsense that has happened so much. Like the in-law mom, we didn't even mention the in-laws, but the in-laws mom is basically like trying to get Charlie to open up. And she's like yelling at him in the courtroom and he's yelling at her. And it's like, this would never be allowed. Never.
You know why we forgot to mention the in-laws for the most part? Because that's another element that adds nothing to the actual emotional core.
Nothing to the movie. And then also the guy who's played by BJ Novak, I think it's like the whatever attorney for that side.
Prosecutor
or something like that. Yeah. Like just puts a photo, and obviously Adam is extremely triggered at what's going on here. And he just puts the photo of his family in front of him like, "Hey, take that, Adam." And he starts screaming the fucking train over me thing. In literally, it's just autistic meltdown. That's literally what's happening here. They say breakdown. No, he's just literally having an autistic meltdown here.
He's just screeching.
But he did something on purpose to trigger a defendant in a trial here. That would be somebody who would literally go to jail for that.
Then he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, does this look like a sane man?"
You could literally lose your license over that. That is so much legal malpractice over something that is frankly not at any trial. This would not be allowed, but at a trial that's not that fucking serious. This is a psychiatric determination trial, and this guy's willing to probably potentially lose his license on a stunt like that. Ridiculous.
How many Americans do you think their whole notion of like the legal system or American courts is tied to things they've seen in movies like this and Liar Liar?
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and then the Donald Sutherland judge is like, "No, you just shut up." And it's like, wow, that was really putting him in his place for doing the most scumbag lawyer thing you could possibly do. Reprehensible, like straight up reprehensible.
Like,
I'm sorry.
Straight up like a Bill O'Reilly move.
Yeah. God. But anyways, yeah, the judge is like, "Well, this obviously dangerous man who pulls guns on cops. This is a family matter, so you should decide what happened." This is the sicko lib judge right here. Like, this is a dangerous man who is mentally unstable, dangerous to himself and others. This man I don't think this guy should be in prison, obviously. He needs mental help.
No, he needs help.
But he needs mental health treatment. He not outpatient, he needs inpatient mental health treatment.
Another funny thing about this movie, one of the core conflicts, one of the core emotional conflicts, is the sort of ethical question of like, oh, maybe he does need help, but he's coming to you as his friend because he thinks you won't try to make him get help. So if you try to make him get help, are you really being a good friend? And it's like, yes.
Yes, objectively, yes. Yes.
In the universe of the movie, I think that's a good thing for Don Cheadle's character to think of. But yeah, if your friend is that unwell, you don't just go, "Well, I think it's fine." That's what he wants to do, man.
No, it does. But eventually, he doesn't get committed. He moves out of his apartment, his fail apartment, which is actually kind of a cool apartment, but it's his family apartment.
Watching this movie, I do get jealous for Charlie's life. Like, I'm sorry. I do.
It's kind of cool.
Well, that's because really that's the point of this movie. It's kind of like when you watch I Love You, Man, another very of its time fucking millennial comedy, is that everyone wants to make a friend who has a ton of money independently and just hangs out and plays video games and plays guitar. Who doesn't want that?
Oh, and we didn't clarify earlier. So the reason that Charlie's able to be a recluse is because of the insurance payouts and government after it all happened. So he's basically set for life to be a man child because he just basically hit the fucking insurance lottery by having all this family die.
Do you think anything comparable to that happened for any of the 9/11 victims?
No.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I was like, I don't know if that.
But
happened.
This is a movie Just let it.
Sure.
That's one of the least. That's one of the least ridiculous things in this movie.
Well, because that is some bullshit that has to exist for the story to happen, and I can accept stuff like that in this kind of movie. But the things like the whole subplot about the fake SA allegation, weird, doesn't belong here.
Oh, yes. And I also do want to clear. So at the very end, so Adam Sandler doesn't go get committed or whatever. Like, the in-laws are finally relenting and just leaving him alone. And then eventually he gets a girlfriend. And who is the girlfriend? Sexual assault allegation blowjob lady.
Why? And this is a happy ending for everyone.
And he gets to be a fail guy in his new apartment with sexual harassment blowjob lady.
With a psychotic woman who just wants to constantly give him blowjobs. Like, no, these are two unwell people. The answer to their problems is not hook them up.
Those people would trauma bond a lot. But eventually.
That's the sequel to this movie, is that dysfunctional relationship.
Yeah, God, it's so fucking funny. But eventually, so moves out of the apartment. Alan gets Charlie's fucking scooter and just rides off into the distance when Pearl Jam's cover of Rain Over Me happens. And that's the end of the movie. What a fucking
pretty good cover.
Whirlwind. Oh, yeah, great cover, like legitimately.
If you're listening to this and you think that we just blitzed through this movie and it, like, so much happens in this movie and so much of it's inconsequential.
Yes, it is crazy. But, never mind. I'll say my final thoughts because we do have some Amazon reviews. I have a couple Amazon reviews here. I didn't include any 5-star reviews, even though these were overwhelmingly 5-star reviews because they all basically said the same thing. So I didn't want to include them all in there. But I did find a bunch of other reviews, and the vast minority of people who did not give this movie 5 stars on Amazon. So our first review
it's not a 5-star movie.
It's not. I do like this movie, but this is not a 5-star movie.
Yeah, I think we feel the same, which I will find out if we do on our final thoughts. I think we feel similarly.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so Heidi Mallory gives us 4 stars, and the head of the review says, "Wife made me write this." And it's like, wait, Heidi, your wife made you write But no. One of the best roles Adam Sandler has been in. At least that's what my wife says. I didn't watch the movie myself, but as a dutiful husband, I am forced to do so as I am commanded and wrote this review. On the plus side, I don't have to watch Dirty Dancing now, so that's nice. And you know what? This guy was like, damn, Charlie's life is awesome. Doesn't have to deal with a
that's what I was thinking
wife.
Too. You'd think a guy like this would love this movie because it would really speak to him on an emotional level.
And his wife is just like, man, Jada Pickett's character is really identifiable. And he's like, yeah. He's like browsing on his phone, like looking at what the synopsis of Mel Brooks movies are.
He's joining support groups for survivors of 9/11 so he can try to make friends.
He's like, damn, this Tanya Headwoman's ugly as shit, but she seems kind of cool. Oh, God. But anyway, next review here is from Mary Zeus. That's a dog's name. It sounds like a dog's name. But Mary Zeus gives us 4 stars. And the head of the review says, reason? Like a question mark. And the body of the review says, I am not a Sandler fan, but I did enjoy this film. Other reviews can give you a synopsis of the content. But my question is, the title, Rain Over Me? What does it mean? Is it from a song? This puzzles me.
Yes! A song that is played 4 times over the course of the movie. And a song that, I mean, like, it's, yeah, of course, they just picked a random iconic title of a song that lots of people know. But in a very general way, you can pretty clearly tie those lyrics to the theme of this movie. It's about accepting love.
This is somebody who clearly was not paying attention at all.
At all.
At all. Oh, my God. She's like, Bruce Springsteen? What river is he referring to? I don't know. Could be an album? What the fuck? What a fucking moron. And then speaking of morons, our next review here is a 3-star review from A. Hammonds. And the head of the review says, downer. And the body of the review says, didn't really like it. Actors really did excellent job, but story is real bummer.
I mean, like, it is kind of a bummer if you take that part of it seriously, but really, ultimately, this is like a middle-aged, like, hot couch guy wish fulfillment story. That's really what you're watching it for, is the friendship between these two guys, right?
No, absolutely 100%.
Which is why, even though it's attempting to be a bummer in that way, I'm not sure it succeeds, because your emotional core is, wow, look at these two guys being friends.
Yeah, God, it's just some real dumbasses. And
then I guess if I'm the type of dog brain that thinks this is a serious movie about 9/11, you know.
Yeah. Speaking of dog brains, I got one last review here from Cable Guy. So I think the Cable Guy wrote this, but I could be wrong about that. And fucking Murder Brian wrote this. I bet you Murder Brian wrote this review. Just
back in the day.
Wait to the body of this review here. But they gave this 1 star. And the head of the review says, what am I watching? And the body of the review says, there is so much white privilege in this movie, it's laughable. The scene where he pulls the gun out, points it right at the cop, and doesn't get shot. Who wrote this? I couldn't watch anymore after that. Changed the race of Adam Sandler's character, and I wonder how compassionate and understanding everyone would be. This is not for a non-white audience.
I mean, like, yeah, I mean, fair, but also, like, how old is this person? Have you ever seen any movies made before, like, 2015? I'm not saying, like, this person isn't wrong, strictly speaking, but, like, it's a Happy Madison movie. I don't know what to tell you.
It's a Happy Madison movie, exactly. Like, I definitely do kind of understand where this person is coming from, but my whole thing is it's not necessarily... Okay, maybe it was a little bit different back in 2007, but nowadays the cops would have, no matter what, if you're pointing a gun, they would have just lit him up, no matter what.
Right.
Like, the thing that the cops do in this movie is fucking stupid. Like, one of them, he, like, is yelling at his teammate to tackle him from behind him. No cop would ever do that. That is nonsense. It's not a white privilege thing. It's a incompetent cop thing or a non-bloodthirsty cop thing.
Yeah. It's not that he isn't killed because of his white privilege, although I'm not saying that that person doesn't have a point, like, but it's that the entire behavior of the police and indeed the world in this movie is alien.
It is very fucking alien. And I know it, once again, the audience at home who are listening to this, they're like, wow, these guys must really hate this movie. We don't hate this movie.
No,
we like
that's
this movie.
the thing. I enjoy it.
We're picking it apart, but we will admit there are a million flaws to this movie, but we like this movie.
No, I'm going to say I like Adam Sandler very much. I am a big fan of his work. I find him incredibly likable, incredibly talented, incredibly funny, incredibly charming. I like movies about male friendship and kind of movies about aging and kind of rediscovering things about yourself. Those are which are the core emotional themes of this movie. So I liked it. But wow, it's not great.
Like, if it was trying to swing 100 times a baseball bat, it would miss 100 times. Like, they're trying to swing so hard and they just always miss. They always foul at the very least.
the things that this movie succeeded at are actually the simplest things that it should have focused on more. But the things that it thought it was doing really well, like all the 9/11 trauma stuff, it really fumbled on, I gotta say.
Well, you know what, Brian? Maybe one day we'll review Remember Me, the Robert Pattinson movie, which is another, like, sappy fucking, like, 2000s movie that at the very end is a movie about 9/11 in the most ridiculous way possible. It is genuinely hilarious when it happened. Have I told you about Remember Me?
Probably, but I don't know about it. I don't remember it offhand right now.
So it's a sappy, like, 2000s drama movie. Like, Robert Pattinson's in it. Like, I think this was either just after or right before Twilight. I can't remember. But he's in this movie and, like, romantic lead, whatever. And at the very end, he's meeting his dad in the North Tower. And then 9/11 attacks happen. And then the movie's over 5 minutes later. And they're like crying.
Yeah, that sucks.
It's ridiculous.
Cynical.
And it's a movie that, like, if you weren't paying attention, you'd just be like, wait, what? And then the movie, 5 minutes later, like, they really ended this movie with 9/11. Are you serious?
They just added that after 9/11 happened to manipulate people into taking it seriously.
Yeah, that movie is a pile of shit. And, like, so speaking of Remember Me, so the reason I wanted to choose this, and everything's over, Amazon reviews are over and everything. The reason I wanted to choose this is because this episode is going to be released on 9/11. We are not recording this on 9/11 if the fucking Donald Sutherland RIP shutout on the day wasn't clear enough. But the reason I wanted to choose this is, you know, obviously, once again, 9/11 is a very pivotal moment. I would say probably the single most pivotal moment for basically all ages of millennials.
Yes.
But the reason I also wanted to choose this movie is because this was like the one movie that we did not get to on my previous podcast, Cage Fight, in our 9/11 bracket. And I was so upset that we didn't get to continue. I'm like, come on, we were so close to watching Reign Over Me. We were so close.
I mean, this is probably one of the first major motion pictures to try to articulate post 9/11 trauma that basically the whole country experienced. And it fails at it, but it was an attempt. It was the earliest attempt I know of to try to talk about that trauma, that collective trauma.
The earliest one, because this movie came out in 2007, and World Trade Center came out in 2006, which was the first major film to be about 9/11. As far as I'm aware of, it was the first major film.
Well, but what this is specifically, though, about the trauma of 9/11. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yes, that is true. Actually, World Trade Center is a movie literally about 9/11. It is about...
that's like a biopic, kind of, right?
Yeah.
Not a biopic, but...
about
docudrama.
Two like first responders that get trapped and they get saved. So I mean, that one's literally on 9/11. So yeah.
But it's very clumsy. And like I said, the movie would be better off if it didn't try to do this. This is an attempt to grapple with the after effects of 9/11, which I don't think anyone on a big mainstream scale had even attempted to do at that point.
No, I totally agree. I don't think so either. But yeah, so that is our review of Reign Over Me. Now, Brian, do we have any final thoughts before we get to our pluggables here?
I don't know, man. Like, it's hard for me to say. I wanted to be more up on this movie because, again, I enjoyed it. I like Adam Sandler. I like Happy Madison. I actually think it's kind of a feel-good movie. It's a nice movie about two friends getting to know each other again and kind of getting in touch with their feelings and learning to be vulnerable, which is nice. The sappy side of me really likes shit like that. But when I think about all the stuff that we just picked apart in it, it's hard for me to recommend this. I would say, though, if you're an Adam Sandler fan like me, like I am a big Adam Sandler fan, I am an Adam Sandler defender, and I am very proud of that. I would say that this is a pretty essential movie because there is no other film in Adam's output like this.
Yes, I am basically going to piggyback off of all your points, and I'm actually going to do a little bit of a change of pace from if I recommend it or not. So I would have recommended this movie if I was talking to somebody in 2008, 2009, or 2007. I would have told people to watch this movie because I think now, especially in the 2010s, when there's been a bit of an Adam Sandler renaissance, not even a bit, like an extreme Adam Sandler renaissance,
Yes.
where like basically even every critic will admit that Adam Sandler is a good actor and a good performer at this point. Like, there's really no reservations about that anymore. But, like, back in the day when everyone was like, oh, he's just making these shitty Happy Madison fucking comedy movies. And it's like, I would show this to somebody in, like, 2008 to be like, no, Adam Sandler actually can put in a good performance. Like, watch this fucking movie. So I would do that now, or I would have done that then. But now I would say just watch Uncut Gems. Watch Punch Drunk Love. Watch Funny People. Like, watch basically anything other than this if you want to see a great Adam Sandler performance.
But at the time, there weren't as many choices for that. And there weren't as many Sandler going serious attempts. And to be honest, compared to those other films we just listed, he is kind of just doing a variation on his angry man-child persona. Like, this character is almost Bobby Boucher.
Yeah. He really is. Well, speaking of another Happy Madison thing, I would have loved it at the end if the judge had, like, heard all the evidence. And he's like, well, that was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. We are all dumber having just listened to it. Like another Happy.
Yes. Just a call back to that?
Yeah.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent presentation did you approach anything even close to what can be called irrational thought.
Have a good day, sir. Was that in God Bless All of Us or something like that? Or God's...
I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
That was it. Yeah, that would have been fucking hilarious.
A simple wrong would have been fine.
Oh, God. So, yep, that is our review of Reign Over Me. So let's get into our pluggables here. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on twitter.com. And as well, please follow us and subscribe to both our YouTube and our Spotify channel, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well, once again, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father GoFundMe. They're getting money and supporters every day, but they need obviously a lot more, and they need a lot more support here from all of us to make episode 2 and beyond happen for this great, amazing series from our good friends, Scott, Sean, and Robert.
Please. Also, please follow us on the Millennials Are Old Pod Instagram account and reach out to us at the Millennials Are Old Facebook page with your 9/11 trauma stories. Genuinely, any Millennials, Zoomers, or Zoomers, older Zoomers, I suppose, listening, please reach out and share with me your weird feelings that you had when you first learned about 9/11 as a child. We will read them out on the podcast and we will make fun of them.
Absolutely. There's one tweet that's really funny where it's like it was something like the first post Super Bowl commercial after 9/11, and it was like, two horses like kneeling in front of the flag, and the dad's like having like his fucking like, arm up to like salute, and the guy's like, oh yeah, they're actually praying to Mecca, and his dad had to walk out.
That's the all black male from FYAD. Those horses are kneeling to Mecca. He got so mad he had to leave and go outside.
Because I can genuinely
not.
That happened.
Those horses are not.
Those horses are American.
Yeah, like what?
Oh, God, Jesus. So, all right. And, speaking of Reign Over Me, I'm going to have my tiredness reign over me as I'm going to fall asleep. So have a good night, everybody. Sleep well, sleep tight, and don't let Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Muhammad Atta, and Osama Bin Laden bite tonight. So have a good night, everybody.
Good night, gang.
Hell yeah.